Hello and a warm welcome to a special edition of Racing Debate here on Sky Sports Racing. It's an online version of the programme today. We are going to be joined by two familiar faces, regular guests on the Racing Debate. I'm Sean Boyce and I'll be hosting the conversation today, and I'm joined by Josh Apiafi, who joins us live from Lambourne. What's the latest in Lambourne, in the Valley of the Racehorse? How are we, Josh?
We're very well, Sean. The sun is shining, which is great. So it's kept people in a good mood, really. And the village life, everyone's respecting the distance. The jumpers are out in the field, but the flat horses are all still in training.
Yep, and keeping busy. And joining us also from what he insists on calling God's own country, Jim McGrath is with us as well. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, Sean. Yeah, all fine up here, raring to go. Difficult times we're in, frustrating on the one hand, frightening on the other. We just got to go with it at the minute.
Yes, all of those things apply. There's only one topic in town at the moment, obviously. We are going to talk about the world of racing in Britain and Ireland, in the wider world as well, in the context of the current situation with the coronavirus pandemic worldwide and all of the challenges therein. I spoke to Richard Wayman from the British Horse Racing Authority last week, who outlined the BHA's plan. They have a plan of action for COVID-19, and there's 3 R's, he said. One is the response, which we'll come to in a minute. The other is recovery, which is probably a bit further down the line for us to talk about. And the other R was resumption, when we start racing, which is a big talking point, very, very controversial in some ways. So we'll certainly talk about resumption. Before we start on resumption, though, chaps, what about reaction and response? How BHA responded, how racing responded, because of course we trialled racing behind closed doors for less than a day at our own initiative before, at our own initiative, we decided to suspend racing. Now that was a few weeks ago, Josh. Based on where we are now, was that the right decision? Because we often forget, people think that governments banned sports and banned racing. Wasn't the case. We suspended racing. Right choice or not?
I think looking back, and hindsight's a great thing as well. Looking back, I think we may have stopped a bit swiftly, but we were going to stop. So whether it was going to be the Tuesday or whatever day we stopped, I think it was the Monday we went behind closed doors and we stopped on a Tuesday. If we hadn't stopped till the Friday, it's still, we would have stopped. It is the sort of default. You look at the equine flu. It's the BHA, when we've had these decisions, is the default is let's stop, review, and then go from there, rather than try and work with it.
Yeah, so that was an interesting take on that. But what about you, Jim? Because some people would argue, I spoke to trainer Mark Johnston shortly after the decision had been made, without the benefit of hindsight, crucially, and he said, no, I don't agree with this decision. It was too hasty. What do you think? Have we painted ourselves into a corner in terms of how we can ever restart?
I think the last point you just made is a very pertinent one. I think it's also important. We're all emotive about racing, and someone like Mark runs a huge business, and his remarks were made a few weeks ago. But every day the situation's changing, or certainly has over the last 3 weeks. The fact is, whether it was right or wrong, that's the decision that was taken by the people that run racing. We are stopping of our own accord. Why? Because we do not want to interfere in any way with the NHS. So obviously, if you stop, and since stopping, lockdown measures were strengthened, they'd started to come in, they were strengthened, racing can't be asking to start when the situation has got far, far worse, in my opinion, until we actually see some downturn in the numbers, because the pressure on the NHS is vastly different now to when that decision was taken.
That's a good point. That brings us right into the whole question of resumption. I spoke with Brant Dunshay from the BHA, who's in charge of the whole resumption strand of work, and he said 2 things to me. He said, we won't be racing again until it's practical, and also that it's appropriate. And those are not necessarily the same thing, Josh. So first of all, when will it be practical? When will it be feasible? And then we'll come to the appropriate question. When might we be in a position to move forward, do you think?
Okay, so in terms of public perception is a huge one, and obviously working with government, and I see that the BHA have this resumption of racing group as well. So it's good that we are planning that when we can possibly go. Now, I've been asked this question on a regular basis in terms of when is racing going to come back. For me, it's gonna be around about a month after we see a plateau in the death toll and the cases that are coming through. You're going to need a bit of time to get rocking and rolling. The horses at the moment, in terms of the practical reasons, the flat horses at the moment are just are ticking over, but you're going to need to get some, a couple of bits of work into them. So at least 2 or 3 weeks on that front. So they're not fully, you don't walk around 100% fit. No one does, not even Mo Farah. So you've got to just bring them up to the boil. So I think, I would safely say a month after, if there are other industries that are starting at the same time. Racing cannot be the one leading the way to come back. I think there will be a momentum of other industries that are in a lot worse situation than racing wanting to come back, and we can come along around about the same time.
Jim?
Yeah, I basically agree with what Josh has said. And it's interesting that, he's speaking from a perspective, he actually lives on the cusp or within, a racing community, the Lambourne area. What's slightly incongruous about the whole situation, Sean, to me, as someone who doesn't, I go racing a lot, but I don't live in it. If you're in a racing community, particularly, if you're a member of staff with a big trainer, dozens and dozens, in some cases, well over 100 horses are being exercised every day. And of course, with that situation, inevitably, from time to time, someone's going to incur an injury. So the NHS does have to get involved. So why can't we race? Well, I don't think some people have grasped that the actual training of the horses comes under horse or animal welfare. And it's important to remember that. We can keep our animals ticking over under welfare issues, but racing is another matter. And taking away, or the possibility of taking away from our NHS at tracks to race, no matter how important it is to us as Racing PLC, in the wider picture, isn't seen as important.
Yeah, and you made the point earlier, Jim, that one of the reasons that racing suspended when it did was being mindful, being conscious of not being a drain on key national resources, particularly the NHS. So as long as that's the case, so that's kind of bringing the two strands together, isn't it? The perception and the PR issue, if you like. But it's a practical consideration. If you can't square that circle, we can't go back to work.
Well, the other thing is, when is the right time? So far as racing goes, it will take its lead, I would imagine, from Dr. Jerry Hill, who's the medical officer, not just for jockeys' welfare. He's part of his remit is race day medical care. So I would assume Dr. Hill takes his lead from government via the BHA, and only when the government sees fit to say, yes, it's now safe or safe enough to start resuming activities such as racing, can we go ahead? But the fact is, let me say I've got grandstand tickets for you every day at Royal Ascot. Let's say Royal Ascot was going to go ahead. Without knowing who had coronavirus or not, Sean, would you go?
That's a very good question. I didn't. There's been a lot of discussion about Cheltenham, hasn't there? Which is continuing today in the media. I didn't go to Cheltenham this year for the first time in several years, purely by accident. Actually, it was just the way that things turned out. But even before the meeting began, if I'm honest with you, Jim, I was very glad that I wasn't going.
Well, no, what I'm trying to say is let's take the view that every day the situation changes. Okay, rightly or wrongly, it's happening, as you've just said. People are now slagging Cheltenham off. Whether they should or they shouldn't, they are. But we're 3 weeks on from Cheltenham, and we know a lot more about it, and the severity of it is much more apparent. So what I'm saying to you is, without any testing, the powers that be, i.e. the government, then racing, say, oh, we can start racing again. Would you go?
It depends, is the answer. If, for example, I'd had it and I knew I'd had it, yeah, absolutely, because I'd feel much more safe and secure. If I hadn't or couldn't be sure, then probably not. Which brings us to another element which we're not in control of course, Josh. Nobody is in control of when the government will have the knowledge required, and that's going to be certainly about testing, one assumes, to get some kind of handle on how many people have been exposed to it, how many people have come through it, and that's going to inform the government's decision. So in that sense, we're all guessing, aren't we? Because we're waiting for that progress.
You're answering Jim's question like a true politician there, Sean, with another question to me, which I completely agree. And actually, there's a link here in terms of what you're asking, which is the testing. And there's a link to Jim McGrath as well, because Newbury Racecourse is now geared up as a testing centre, a drive-through testing centre, so which is brilliant. So Our local surgery in Lambourne closed only a week after coronavirus hit. And you could turn up, you couldn't walk in, sorry, but you could make a phone. Most of it was done on 111, as we all know. We've got some good friends who's a nurse at Lambourne Surgery. She's now working at Newbury Racecourse at the testing centre, the drive-through testing centre. I don't think it's open yet. I think they open up next week. So looking at how we can utilise racecourses, I think it's a very positive PR message to government and to society that we've got some facilities there. We also saw at Newbury that we're doing using the kitchens to do meals on wheels for the elderly and infirm. So I think there's some very positive stuff that horse racing can do, and get it out there and tell. Don't be afraid of it. Get it out and tell people.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think Haydock might be doing something similar. Presumably those testing centres will be aimed at key workers, NHS workers and stuff like that.
You presume? I presume so. I haven't looked enough into it. I only know that it's not been announced. I only know because of the people that work locally to me or live locally to me are actually starting. That's what they're working towards.
There is an argument out there, which I hear often. You know, whenever people like us are having this discussion, that the counter argument which comes up is, how on earth can you even think about this? People are dying. There's a national emergency. Why on earth are you even considering this question at the moment? What's your response? Either of you jump in.
Well, I'm in terms of considering it. You've always got to be prepared, Baden Powell. You know, you've got to make sure that there's a plan in place. You can't turn racing on and off. You know, you've got to have. It's got to simmer there at a level in terms of the horses. You've got to have a plan. As Jim's question to you was a similarly tough question, but we've got to have the answer there, because we won't be racing if it is questionable in any way, shape, or form. We shouldn't be holding a race meeting. So we need to make sure that we're coming back again the same as when other sports do. It's pretty much guaranteed it's going to be behind closed doors. There are other options out there in terms of sanitized zones, which means that nobody comes in and out for a week, which generally the only thing that would come out is the in and out are the horses. People would drive up, and they've talked about having sort of professional stable lads, a la stall handlers, that would then lead the horses up and then put them back on the box. So the only thing that would be leaving the racetrack. That's just one option. So you can see that racing are thinking about different options. They're not talking about it. It's us that's talking about it in the media. But what they're doing is they're preparing to be ready when the country, the government and the public are ready to see sport commence.
What's the moral argument for racing, Jim, for getting back as soon as is practical?
The moral argument for racing is the same moral argument for every big business and industry provider in this country. But it boils down to safety, in my opinion. It boils down to safety. And until we can't provide, should we be testing jockeys, trainers and stable staff when there aren't enough resources to provide proper equipment for national health staff, for people who are ill in hospital? You know, if we can't do that, should business has to come second at the minute? And ours is a very big one, depending on which government survey you look at. We are reckoned to be, with its associate workers, the 5th or 6th biggest employer in the country. So of course it's very important, but in the current scheme of things, it is less important, because the people at the forefront of this, the hospital workers and the really ill, haven't got enough resources. And until we're better off or better on in terms of testing and providing equipment, I'm afraid, like everyone else, we have to sit and wait.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. I wonder if we could learn anything from elsewhere, or is everywhere too different? Because of course, Ireland, they're currently suspended like us. France are suspended like us, but due to review it very soon. Although we spoke to Catherine Ford in France the other day, she said everyone at France Gallo, everyone in the French industry is just waiting on the government. Same as you've just said, Jim. We have to wait on the government here. Sweden, who've taken a very different view across the board, they're continuing to race, albeit behind closed doors. Germany, I think, is coming back on the 1st of May, behind closed doors. Other jurisdictions like Hong Kong have carried on throughout. In Australia, I think, Josh, you've been looking into Australia as well, have you?
I have, yes. I've looked at a few of the jurisdictions. Hong Kong, there's only been 4 deaths in Hong Kong. They've continued behind closed doors, and we've seen, you know, a lot of our bookmaker partners and the Tote offering more localized products on Hong Kong to. You know, a lot of people have been ringing up. People still want to watch sport. They still want to have a bet, and things like having a play spot on Hong Kong is fantastic, because it's the kind of bet they're used to. If you look at Australia, there's only 56 deaths, and they've been. I spoke to Greg Nichols, previous BHA or BHB, I think he was actually back in the day, chief executive in the week, and he was saying, you know, they're very comfortable. There's been no. I asked him about the political situation, if there's been any pressure to why they're because they are the only sport that's going on, and they're very government and regulatory friendly. And he said there's been no pressure whatsoever. People are sat at home; they want something to watch. They're quite a bit like Ireland. It's really part of their culture, the racing side, and there's been no pressure whatsoever for them to stop. But granted, when you're talking about 56 rather than the near 9,000 we've had in the UK, it's definitely a different pandemic. No, it's not. Is it a pandemic down there? Yes, it is. But it's those numbers are very different. I looked at other numbers. Dubai suspended on the 22nd of March. They've only had 16. I say only. It's horrendous, isn't it? There's been 16 deaths in Dubai. So the behind closed doors does seem the route forward. It's pretty similar the way that they're doing it. That people do come in and out. There's a maximum of 500 people total. Greg says they're nowhere near that in terms of hosting a race meeting. It's probably nearer 200. We've seen Tom Marquand, went down there just before this broke, and he's probably the most excited. A great move for him, and has won some group races down there. So theirs is ticking away fine, but I don't think they've got the problem or the political and public pressure or intensity that we're going to see here. But again, like I say with Jim, Jim was saying, once we've got the supplies to the NHS, and that's the biggest problem. It's not our problem. It's the testing kits and where we are on this loop. Once we plateau off and there's enough testing kits and people are getting tested, frontline staff are all covered, only then can we really start talking about coming back. Before then, we won't get laughed at. We'll get absolutely slaughtered, and it just, I can't see it happening. And it is. We got an email. Everyone who's sort of connected on that side of the business got an email about the resumption of Racing Group, just keeping us informed the other day. That's not going public, and it's not, and we can't let that be seen that we are pushing to launch, because we're not pushing to launch, and we shouldn't be.
Yeah, that's something that just struck me as you were speaking there, Josh, and you may have a view on this as well, Jim. I wonder if racing is in a different position to other sports, because as Josh said, no major sport can resume. Football can't resume. We won't get the Premier League back until it's sort of a safe and responsible thing to do, and the NHS has the resources to deal with it, and the police have the resources if necessary to keep to police the behind closed door thing and all that sort of thing. I wonder if racing will face a particular challenge, a particular hurdle. When I look at the way that Cheltenham's been singled out, it's being singled out in a different way to football, for example. Does racing have a public image issue because of the people rightly or wrongly associated with big money and wealthy people and powerful people, all that sort of stuff? Have we got a tougher challenge than other sports?
I'll come to that in just one second. Can I just backtrack to add to what Josh said about Australia? I contacted Gary Crisp, who comes over here for Royal Ascot every year. Obviously, he won't be this year. He runs a big racing and sports website over there and is associated with Timeform. He said Australia learned a lot in 2007 when racing was banned for months for equine influenza. And the reason it's gone ahead was they were able to demonstrate that they had top class facilities in terms of enforcing sanitization, etc., etc. And the one person to fall foul of the rules so far, all the guidelines issued to the jockeys, a young girl called Zoe White, she was banned for 6 months for breaching where she should be. Now, in fairness, let me point out, she is appealing that. With regard to your direct question, does racing have an image? Look, I'm not saying there was any malintent this week, but I thought this week's announcements, re Epsom and the possibility of Royal Ascot, the latter almost certainly misinterpreted deliberately or otherwise by some sections of the media, showed that racing isn't on the same page. Royal Ascot might go ahead. Now, it's important to stress that the statement said, provided, because it would have to, as it's parliamentary granted anyway, it met the government's requirements. So, if it was safe to have Royal Ascot behind locked doors, then there was a chance it could go ahead. But on the same day that happened, Epsom said they were postponing the Classics. So were we going to have Royal Ascot before the Classics? Is that what it just showed to me, it wasn't a sport speaking with one voice. So if we have an image problem, we may not. We're not helping ourselves.
The classics, Ascot. Does it matter whether we run these races or not this year?
Well, let's look. We're in an unprecedented time. So what's the nearest thing we've ever had to this? Well, the last time was during the last major war in the 40s. And around that time, racing was very different then. There were around 330 fixtures, 340 fixtures scheduled throughout the UK in the late 30s. Now, by 1941, we ran just 86 fixtures. In 1944, during the wars, we were coming towards the end of it, we ran just 68 fixtures. We used 13 courses in 41. We used 6 in 44. And Newmarket was very much had the lion's share. But the reason I was cross about those statements the other day, and where joined up thinking could have helped a lot, is it's all very well saying Ascot owns the Gold Cup, so it can say what it likes about it. It's all very well saying Epsom owns the Derby. It can say what it likes about it. What they don't own is Epsom Derby Group 1 and funding. Ascot doesn't own Gold Cup Group 1 and funding. Both those parts of that contest belong to the BHA. And as a courtesy, those press releases should have been run by the BHA, because they, whatever Ascot or Epsom were saying, they have a say in it too. So they could have avoided all that by going by the BHA. Is it important all the races are run? Well, racing is run in conjunction with the breeding season, and the breeding season dictates when the horses are ready, etc., etc. So we're going to lose, 2 months at least, maybe more. It's not important that all the races that we've lost are run, including some of the big ones. And it's up to the powers that be to organise a proper balanced programme. If we started, and it's a big if we started at the end of July, say, hopefully we'll get going before, but in a more meaningful way, you could still run 3 classics. If we didn't, 5 classics. If we didn't run till the end of September, are you really going to run a Guineas, a Derby, a Ledger, etc.? You've got to look at it and take it day by day. No one has all the answers because no one knows when the resumption is. And the most important point is, let's get the thing back on properly when we can, for everybody, jockeys, stable staff, and everybody else involved. Let's get it on in conjunction with the way the country is at the minute, and let's make a proper fist of it and stop all the factions.
That's a good cry for unity. I mean, funnily enough, we get the feeling that everyone is pulling together, but maybe in the background, 1 or 2 things are
well, so very quickly, the talk of that's been in the papers for the last 2 or 3 weeks about the resumption on 3 all-weather tracks. I know another track that's moaning, well, why are they getting first go at it? So the belly aching started in some quarters before we've even got going.
Well, I guess that's inevitable, though, because, there is a lot at stake here. In terms of what's at stake, I spoke to Alan Del Monte on the channel the other day, the chief executive of the levy board, and I said, put some numbers on this, Alan, because everyone's spending your money. I've heard racecourses who want you to sort of, subsidise them while they're off, provide the prize money when they come back because they won't have crowds. He said they do have historically quite big reserves, maybe as much as 40 million quid. But, and it's a big but, they're spending 2 million quid a month because of ongoing commitments. They would normally be getting in at least 7.5 million on average a month, and more in March and way more in April, you'd think, with the Grand National and all of that. So you add those figures together, and if we lose 2 or 3 months, suddenly, with a lot of demands on their resources, there's not a lot of money in the pot. So, we do need to pull together and sort it out. And as you say, Jim, make a good fist of it when we do get sorted.
Yeah, on that front, I think we're going to be seeing Che Guevara adverts with Jim McGrath come together as one. But no, I'm in complete agreement. We're right. We've always wanted to sing with one voice. I was up until last week. We were. I think it was a simple mistake that could have been sorted out. And again, hindsight's an easy thing. But maybe that's helped us all come together. And the BHA, it then comes through as one voice. And what we need to do is not have different fractions going out with different ideas, announcements, because we have got to, if we are to get there as fast as we possibly can, and we've talked about it the whole way through this show, in terms of understanding with government, with public perception and what have you, the way to do it is together and not with one sort of champion trying to be first.
Well, I mean, I agree with the principle of that, and just to sort of crystallise my own point a bit, there'll always be factions because we're all different businesses, and we've all got. I'm very opinionated, as you know, but what I would say is, if we could just unite about getting back on, and then we can start squabbling, as we always like to do, once we're back on. But let's let the authority sort it out and put us back on, and then we can get back to our old ways of disagreeing on virtually everything. But we need to get back on as a group, or it will look bad.
I was having a chat with a few friends from all kinds of different worlds yesterday on exactly this platform that we're using today, funnily enough, and we were just remarking we wouldn't normally be having this conversation. It's quite good. So some unexpected positives do emerge from times of challenge. Is there anything that might change for the better for horse racing, do you think? Ida, I'm springing this on you. I haven't prepared you for this because it's just come into my mind. Could there be something that we'll learn from this whole process that might benefit us all in the long run?
Yeah, well, my dad actually asked me that very same question because I asked him. My dad's from the aviation industry, so exactly the same question back to him. So, and my answer was, I think we'll be better prepared for it. This will not be the last pandemic that hits this world, and I think this time we're massively going to sit down and review what we did. But then, let's say, in 3 years' time, as soon as something happens somewhere, be it a bat being eaten or whatever it was. You know, it may be that 20 jockeys, we go back to Jim's comment there, 20 jockeys, 100 horses, ex-trainers, stewards, all get put at one sanitised place and it is completely there. So the sport, and it's not just us, the one thing we haven't mentioned today is it's affected the betting industry, which is as big again. It's doubles the size of our sport if you include them. And they've had to furlough the majority of their staff and shops are closed. So, preparing our sport for a pandemic, I think, like you said, going back to the Australian comment, I think we're going to be far more prepared for it, and we could even continue through a pandemic next time with the learnings from this time.
That's a nice observation. What about you, Jim? Anything that we can learn, do you think?
I was speaking to somebody who's pretty close to the Jockeys Association the other day, and they said if there was one main thing they hoped racing would improve upon as a result of this, was hygiene.
Interesting. So we can learn lessons. Look, Jim McGrath, we're going to give you the final word there on hygiene. I think we can all learn to appreciate what we do have a little bit more. Sometimes less is more. I'm getting into other aspects of racing. Enjoy my American sport on Sky Sports Racing at the moment. That's for sure. Jim McGrath, thank you very much up there in the north. Josh Apiafi in Lambourne, thank you very much as well. But most of all of you who have tuned in and enjoyed the program, thank you very much for your company. We hope we see you racing soon.